Welcome, traveler of time. You've entered a realm where kings rise, empires fall, and every crown carries a curse. Today, we journey through the life of one of history's most fascinating figures, where love, power, and destiny intertwine. We find ourselves in Rome at the very end of the 15th century. The air itself is thick with ambition, the scent of incense, and the coppery tang of old blood. This is not just a city of God. It is a serpent's nest of power, a place where cardinals scheme like warlords, and the papal throne is the ultimate prize. And in 1492, that prize was seized by the most ambitious, ruthless, and worldly man to ever wear the triregnum, Rodrigo Borgia, who took the name Pope Alexander VI. But this story is not about him. Not truly. It is about his daughter, a girl with hair like spun gold and eyes the color of the Mediterranean. A girl whose name would become a whisper, a warning, a curse. Lucrezia Borgia. History remembers her as a monster, a poisoner, a seductress who shared her bed with her own father and brother, a depraved puppet who danced on the strings of her family's corrupt ambition. But behind the beauty, behind the whispers that echoed from the apostolic palace, lay a shadow, a story so dark, so twisted by propaganda and fear, that it would become the most infamous Lucrezia Borgia scandal of the Renaissance. This was a woman whose very existence was a political tool, whose marriages were treaties, and whose divorces were declarations of war. She was born into the most notorious family in history, a golden pawn in a game played for the soul of Italy. Her life was a crucible, forged in the fires of her father's insatiable greed and her brother's sociopathic ambition. She was surrounded by men who saw her not as a daughter or a sister, but as a key to unlock alliances, to secure territories, and to solidify a dynasty that sought to claim all of Italy as its own. Every feast she attended, every hand she kissed, every vow she took, was a move on this bloody chessboard. The world watched, horrified and fascinated, as the Borgias rewrote the rules of power, using sacrilege, simony, and murder as their ink. But as we peel back the layers of black legend, as we sift through the poison ink of her enemies, a different figure begins to emerge. A woman of intelligence, of grace, of resilience. A woman who navigated a court of vipers and survived. A woman who would ultimately have to choose between the family that defined her and the survival of her own soul. So, we must ask the question that has haunted historians for 5 centuries. Was Lucrezia Borgia the willing accomplice to her family's crimes? A Renaissance femme fatale who wielded poison as deftly as she did a courtier's fan? Or was she their most tragic victim, a woman trapped in a golden cage, forced to watch as her name was systematically destroyed to build her brother's empire? This is the story of that scandal. The story of the schemes, the blood, and the survival of Lucrezia Borgia. To understand the woman, you must first understand the family. The Borgias were not Italian. They were outsiders, Spanish, from Valencia. And in the cutthroat world of Italian politics, this made them perpetually distrusted, forcing them to be twice as cunning, twice as ruthless. Lucrezia's great-uncle, Alfonso, had been the first Borgia Pope, Calixtus III. Her father, Rodrigo, learned from him, mastering the art of ecclesiastical politics, a game of patience, bribery, and breathtaking corruption. When Rodrigo Borgia bought the papacy in 1492, he didn't just win a spiritual office. He won a kingdom. He was a prince, a CEO, and a holy father all at once. And he intended to use his power not just for the church, but for his children. His children. They were his obsession. Not his nephews, as previous popes had claimed, but his acknowledged, beloved, and illegitimate offspring. Cesare, the brilliant, ruthless strategist, forced into a cardinal's red robes against his will. Juan, the spoiled, swaggering favorite, made commander of the papal armies. And then there was Lucrezia. Born in 1480, she was raised not in the austerity of a convent, but in the lap of luxury, educated by the finest tutors, taught Latin, Greek, music, and the subtle, dangerous art of courtly diplomacy. She was, by all accounts, charming, intelligent, and luminously beautiful. And to her father, she was his most valuable diplomatic asset. She was the human currency of his new reign. Her life as a pawn began almost immediately. At just 13 years old, she was married off to Giovanni Sforza, Lord of Pesaro. This was not a match of love. It was a cold, calculated alliance. The Sforza family, rulers of Milan, were powerful. By linking his daughter to them, Pope Alexander secured a crucial ally in the north of Italy. Lucrezia, a child, was sent to Pesaro, her glittering dowry a testament to the Pope's ambition. She was now a political wife, host of a minor court, a symbol of the Borgia-Sforza Pact. But in Renaissance Italy, alliances shifted like sand. Within 4 years, the political landscape had changed. The Pope no longer needed the Sforzas. In fact, he now viewed them as a liability, an obstacle to a new, more powerful alliance with Naples. Giovanni Sforza, once a valued son-in-law, was now simply in the way. The order came from Rome. The marriage was to be undone. But how? A simple divorce was impossible. It required a justification. The Borgias, masters of manipulation, fabricated one. They declared that Giovanni Sforza was impotent, that after 4 years, the marriage had never been consummated. It was a public, catastrophic humiliation. Giovanni was ordered to sign papers attesting to his own sexual failure. He was outraged, cornered. He fought back, not with armies. He was hopelessly outmatched by the Pope, but with a weapon far more insidious. He used words. He lashed out, striking at the very heart of the Borgia family. He told anyone who would listen that the reason the Pope wanted Lucrezia back was not political. He claimed the Pope wanted to keep her for himself. And thus, the first and most venomous seed of the Lucrezia Borgia scandal was planted, the rumor of papal incest. It was a monstrous accusation, but in the fevered atmosphere of Rome, it was believable. It stuck. Giovanni eventually fled, fearing for his life, and the marriage was annulled. Lucrezia, now 17, publicly shamed and her name tarnished, was sent to the convent of San Sisto to wait out the storm. She was, for all intents and purposes, a prisoner. But the scandal was only beginning. During this period of supposed seclusion, a mystery arose that has never been solved. In 1498, a papal bull was issued, acknowledging a mysterious child known as the Infans Romanus, or Roman infant. The child, named Giovanni Borgia, was legitimized by the Pope. But who were his parents? One papal bull claimed he was the illegitimate son of Cesare. A second, secret bull, claimed he was the son of Pope Alexander himself. Rumors, however, pointed to a third possibility, that this was the child of Lucrezia, a baby born in secret at the convent. Who was the father? If the child was Lucrezia's, the implications were terrifying. Was the father a secret lover? Or, as the Sforza rumor suggested, was it something far darker? Was it her brother, Cesare, or her father, the Pope? This unresolved mystery, the Infans Romanus, became the dark cornerstone of her legend. She was no longer just a pawn. She was now painted as a woman of profound, unnatural sin. Her rise was complete. She had gone from the Pope's daughter to the most notorious woman in Christendom. Her reputation shattered before she had even turned 18. Her family had given her power, wealth, and status, but at the cost of her name, her honor, and her freedom. Lucrezia was not left to languish. Her father, the Pope, was undeterred by the scandal. In fact, he doubled down. Having severed the tie to Milan, he now looked south to the Kingdom of Naples. He arranged a new, even more brilliant match. In 1498, Lucrezia was married to Alfonso of Aragon, the Duke of Bisceglie. He was the illegitimate son of the King of Naples, and by all accounts, he was the mirror image of her brother Juan. Stunningly handsome, charismatic, and young. And here, the story takes a tragic, human turn. By all contemporary accounts, this was not just a political alliance. Lucrezia and Alfonso genuinely fell in love. For the first time in her life, she seems to have found a measure of personal happiness. She was 18, he was 17. They were a golden couple, and for a brief, shining moment, Lucrezia was not the Pope's pawn, but the Duchess of Bisceglie, a happy wife. She soon gave birth to a son, Rodrigo, named for her father. It seemed as though she had finally escaped the darkness of her family's reputation. But the Borgias were never at rest, and the greatest threat to Lucrezia's newfound peace was not an outside enemy, but her own brother, Cesare Borgia. Cesare was a man of singular, terrifying ambition. He had shed his cardinal's red robes, the first man in history to do so, and embraced his true nature. He was a soldier, a general, a warlord. His father had made him Duke of Valentinois in France, and Cesare had a new grand design. He no longer wanted to be just a duke. He wanted to carve his own kingdom out of the heart of Italy, starting with the Romagna region. To do this, Cesare needed an army, and the most powerful army available belonged to the new king of France, Louis XII. Cesare struck a deal. He would support France's claim to Milan, the Sforza stronghold, in exchange for French troops to help him conquer the Romagna. This was a brilliant political move for Cesare, but it was a death warrant for Lucrezia's husband. Why? Because Alfonso of Aragon was from Naples, and the French king also claimed the throne of Naples. The kingdom of Naples was France's enemy. Suddenly, Lucrezia's husband was not just an ally. He was a political liability. He was the living symbol of an alliance with her brother's new enemy. The Borgia machine, which had given her this marriage, now demanded it be taken away. Alfonso, sensing the change in the air, grew terrified. He was surrounded by his wife's family, a family that had already publicly destroyed one husband. He fled Rome, abandoning Lucrezia and their child. But Lucrezia, showing a spark of the will that would later define her, wrote to him, pleaded with him, and convinced him to return, promising he would be safe. It was a fatal mistake. On the night of July 15th, 1500, as Alfonso of Aragon was walking to the Vatican, he was set upon by a group of assassins on the very steps of St. Peter's. He was stabbed multiple times in the neck, the arm, the thigh. He collapsed in a pool of his own blood, but he was not dead. The assassins, interrupted, fled. Alfonso was carried, bleeding and dying, into the Borgia apartments. What happened next is a testament to Lucrezia's strength and the chilling reality of her life. She was convinced the attack was an attempt on her husband's life. She moved him into her own chambers, barricaded the door, and hired her own trusted guards. She brought in her own doctors from Naples and even tasted his food herself, terrified of the Borgia's favorite tool, poison. For over a month, she desperately nursed him back to health. Against all odds, Alfonso began to recover. Lucrezia was winning. She was defying the will of her family. Cesare Borgia, impatient and furious at this failure, would not be denied. One evening, as Lucrezia was momentarily drawn from the room, Cesari's chief enforcer, the infamously brutal Michelato Corella, simply walked in, dismissed the guards, and cleared the room. A contemporary chronicler wrote that Michelato turned to the wounded Alfonso and said, "What is not done at dinner can be done at supper." He then leaned over the bed and strangled the Duke of Bisceglie to death. Lucrezia returned to find her husband's lifeless body. She was hysterical with grief, but there was no time for mourning in the house of Borgia. Her father, the Pope, banished her to the town of Nepi to grieve. Her child, Rodrigo, was taken from her. The message was clear. Her personal happiness was irrelevant. Her love was an inconvenience. Her only purpose was to serve the family's ambition. This was the absolute, bloody heart of the Lucrezia Borgia scandal. It was no longer rumor. It was no longer public humiliation. It was the cold-blooded murder of her husband, orchestrated by her own brother and sanctioned by her father. The black legend was now cemented in blood. The whispers were true. The Borgias were monsters, and Lucrezia was the golden bait in their trap. The Lucrezia Borgia scandal was now a matter of public record, a brutal display of power that shocked even the hardened sensibilities of Renaissance Italy. This act demonstrated that nothing, not love, not family, not even the sanctity of marriage, stood in the way of Cesari's ambition. Lucrezia was, once again, a widow, but this time she was a widow of 20, her name synonymous with incest, murder, and depravity. She was the most infamous woman in Europe. For any normal family, she would be ruined, unmarriageable, a pariah. But she was a Borgia, and for her father, Pope Alexander, she was still his most valuable asset. Her grief was an inconvenience. Her single status was an opportunity. The Borgia machine needed a new alliance. Cesare had conquered the Romagna, but to hold it, he needed to neutralize the powerful d'Este family of Ferrara to the north. What better way to secure their loyalty than with a marriage? The target was Alfonso d'Este, the heir to the Duchy of Ferrara. But the d'Este family was different. They were ancient, established nobility. They looked down on the Borgias as nouveau riche criminals, Spanish upstarts who had bought their way into power. Duke Ercole d'Este was openly horrified by the prospect of marrying his son and heir to that woman. He recoiled from the Lucrezia Borgia scandal that clung to her like a shroud. He knew the rumors of incest. He knew her first marriage was annulled on a lie. He knew her second husband was murdered by her own brother in the Vatican itself. To bring Lucrezia Borgia into his family was to invite the serpent into his home. He refused, vehemently, but he underestimated the Pope's power. Alexander VI unleashed a torrent of threats and bribes. He threatened to excommunicate Ercole, to seize his lands, to strip his family of their titles. He offered to cancel Ferrara's massive debts to the papacy. And finally, he offered a dowry so enormous it was staggering. Over 2 million ducats, a fortune that could bankroll a kingdom. He was literally buying his daughter a new life. King Louis XII of France, Cesari's ally, also pressured the Duke. Cornered, blackmailed, and finally bought Duke Ercole d'Este agreed. His son would marry the Pope's daughter. In 1502, Lucrezia left Rome for good. Her wedding procession to Ferrara was the most opulent the age had ever seen. It was a parade of her family's power, a final, defiant display. But for Lucrezia, it was an exile. She was leaving her home, her son by Alfonso of Aragon, who remained in Rome, and the only world she had ever known. She was riding into a hostile city to marry a man who despised her, to join a family that feared her. This was not a fall in the traditional sense. This was a golden expulsion. She was the Duchess to be, draped in jewels, but she was also a refugee, fleeing the ruins of her own reputation. She arrived in Ferrara and began the difficult task of winning over a court that believed her to be a monster. And then, just 19 months later, the foundation of her entire world crumbled. In August 1503, both her father, Pope Alexander VI, and her brother, Cesare, fell violently ill after a dinner. The Pope, 72 years old, died in agony. Cesare, younger and stronger, writhed in a fever for weeks but survived, a shadow of his former self. The question has echoed for centuries. Was it poison? Was it the Borgia's own infamous cantarella, accidentally consumed? Or was it, as modern historians believe, a virulent strain of Roman malaria? In the end, the cause was irrelevant. The effect was absolute. With the death of Pope Alexander VI, the Borgia Empire evaporated overnight. The Pope's protection was gone. The family's money was cut off. The papacy was immediately seized by their most hated enemy, Cardinal della Rovere, who became Pope Julius II. Cesare, sick and powerless, was arrested. His kingdom in the Romagna, built on so much blood, collapsed as cities defected one by one. The entire Borgia edifice, which had terrorized Italy for a decade, had fallen. And Lucrezia, in Ferrara, was now utterly, terrifyingly alone. She was no longer the Pope's daughter. She was the sister of a deposed warlord and the daughter of a dead, despised Pope. She was a Borgia, stranded in the court of her enemies. This was her true fall, not from grace, for she had none, but from power. The schemes of her family had finally consumed them, leaving her to face the consequences. The fall of her family was the beginning of her life. Lucrezia, now 23, in a hostile court, married to a man who loathed her, had a choice. She could be the weeping, ruined daughter of a defunct dynasty, or she could become someone else entirely. She chose to become the Duchess of Ferrara. And it is here, in this final act, that the true, complex character of Lucrezia Borgia emerges from the ashes of the scandal. She shed the skin of Rome. She buried the Borgia name and embraced the d'Este. She began, methodically, to win over the people of Ferrara. She was intelligent, charming, and a master of the diplomacy she had learned in the Vatican. Her husband, Alfonso, a gruff soldier, ascended to the duchy, and to everyone's surprise, the marriage blossomed into a partnership of mutual respect and even, it is said, affection. He was often away at war, and he trusted her to rule Ferrara in his absence. The woman history branded a simple-minded puppet was, in fact, a capable and pragmatic ruler. She managed the city's finances, oversaw its courts, and navigated its complex politics. But her true transformation was cultural. Lucrezia, the supposed barbarian, became one of the greatest patrons of the Renaissance. She established a court that rivaled any in Europe for its brilliance in art. She sponsored painters like Titian and Bellini. She championed writers, most notably Ludovico Ariosto, who praised her in his epic poem Orlando Furioso as a paragon of beauty and virtue. The most infamous woman of the age had reinvented herself as a beloved mother of her people, a pious, cultured, and effective duchess. She also turned deeply to religion, as if to atone for the sins of her family. She founded convents, supported monasteries, and spent hours in prayer. She wore a hair shirt beneath her opulent ducal gowns, a secret act of penance. This was the second Lucrezia, the pious duchess, the patron of the arts, the capable ruler. A woman so completely at odds with the Black legend that it is almost impossible to reconcile the two. So who was she? Was the first part of her life a lie, or was the second? The truth, as always, is buried somewhere in between. The Lucrezia Borgia scandal was, in many ways, the first great character assassination by media. Her family's enemies, the Sforzas, the Orsinis, Pope Julius II, needed to destroy the Borgia legacy. They couldn't just defeat them on the battlefield. They had to annihilate their reputation. And Lucrezia was the perfect target. By painting her as a debased monster, they delegitimized her entire family. The stories of poison rings, of incest, of her 40-odd lovers. Almost all of this comes from her enemies, written after her family had fallen and could not fight back. Her legend was solidified centuries later in the Romantic era. Victor Hugo's 1833 play and Donizetti's opera portrayed her as the ultimate femme fatale, a tragic monster who poisons her own son. This is the image that has endured, the beautiful, golden-haired poisoner. But the historical evidence for any of it, the poison, the incest, the murders, is almost non-existent. The evidence against her is rumor. The evidence for her is her 20-year reign as the beloved Duchess of Ferrara. She died in 1519 at the age of 39 from complications of childbirth. Her husband, Alfonso, was said to have wept bitterly at her deathbed, inconsolable at the loss of his dear companion. Centuries later, the echoes of the Borgia legacy still haunt the ruins of history. The name Lucrezia Borgia remains a byword for scandal. But what haunts us is not the monster, but the woman, the 13-year-old pawn, the 20-year-old widow weeping over her murdered husband, the 23-year-old duchess standing alone, remaking herself in a hostile world. She was not a king, but she was forged in the fires of power, and her story, a story of survival against all odds, is more epic, more tragic, and more human than any legend of crown. If stories like this fascinate you, don't forget to like and subscribe. More untold tales of history await you.